Welcome to the Locum Strategist Podcast. I am your host, Simon Parsons, and this is the show where we help physicians take control of their skill set and create a life on their own terms by using locum tenens as a pathway to making that happen. On today's show, I have Dr. Marilyn Stahl, who is an OBGYN, and after working in private practice for about 7 years, she decided that she wanted to prioritize her and her family's wellness, and then locum tenens became an option. So on today's episode, she's going to share her journey with us. Dr. Stahl, how are you doing
Well,
today?
good. I'm really good. It's a great day. I guess we're in May. So we're ready for the summer weather to come.
I sure am. Where are you located?
I'm in Ohio, Northwest Ohio.
Great. And you mentioned that some of your students call you Dr. KS. Tell me a little bit more about your name and how you
Yeah.
prefer to be addressed.
Well, I got remarried 14 years ago, and so I never changed my Ohio license. So I just was Dr. Kindig, but my driver's license changed to my middle name Kindig and my last name Stahl. So when I began applying for my IMLCC and a license in another state, they said I had to be what my driver's license was. So I had to update that, update the hospitals where I had privileges. Kind of a disaster, not terrible. I'm dealing with it. It's going well. A few little paperwork hints to come through. But the students that I teach at a medical school, where I was a clerkship director for a while and working with them, they call me Dr. KS. I think that's very cool.
I think it's cool too. It's very, very relatable. Dr. KS, so my first question is, I want to hear about your backstory. You found your way to locums, but you disclosed to me that you had been in private practice and done some academic work for about 7 years before you started to make that transition. And it may not have been overnight, but tell me a little bit more about that journey and what led up to you deciding that locum tenens might be the right fit for you.
I think just lots of stress. And as a female doctor, I'm doing robotic surgery and delivering babies, and I come home and my family says, "What's for dinner?" Because that's what happens when you come home. And I need to go to soccer games and I need to do lots of things. So I was in private practice, owned my practice, brought in other people, nurse practitioners and some other physicians. So there were 6 of us, and I decided to sell that practice about 8 years ago. Sold that practice and said, I'm going to do something totally different because this is really stressful. That was even before COVID. So I began to do an academic practice in a nearby medical school. And when you start working in any job, they think you're doing a great job. So they give you more and more responsibility. So they wanted me to be clerkship director, covering the clerkship with the students and working with them, which I loved. It was great. And COVID hit. And I decided, I'm going to get an online degree. So we're going to do podcasts and videos, and I'm going to do Zoom meetings with all the students and Google Docs and Google this and Google that. And of course, all the students knew that, and I did not. So I said, okay, I'm going to learn those things. So I ended up going back and get my master's in education. And with that, I thought, things are going pretty well. But fast forward. So last year, my husband was not doing as well. He was in the Gulf War. And so he has some medical issues associated with his service. And I thought, gosh, I just don't think I can do this full time. So I'm going to go to part time and I'll still work there. And then on the vacation we took, as soon as I was done working last April, so that's 1 year ago, I was down in Florida and my mother fell, broke her hip, and had bilateral strokes. And so bringing her home to take care of her, she's not going to make it. She's going to be on hospice in my home. And I'm so thankful I'm not working, just kind of PRN. And then the next week, our son was in North Carolina, I think it was, and he was hit by a car walking across the street for a hit and run. So he came home in a wheelchair. So we had 2 wheelchairs, 2 beds in our main area. And my husband was still like, oh my gosh, who's going to help? And how are we going to get all this accomplished? So with that, I thought, I can't just sign up for call months and months in advance and say I'm going to work so many days at a regular practice. So I stopped working, except just on call with some residents, and said, I'm going to do something different. And that's when I'd heard about locums. And so I tried to get into more of it and figure out what my IMLCC was.
How did you hear about locums?
Some of the military people where I was working at the university were doing weekend locums. And then I'd been to conferences with OB-GYNs and they would talk about doing locums. And so I thought, well, I never really wanted to do that because I didn't want to travel that far. I don't know why I would say such a thing because Ohio is a wonderful place to live. But I thought, I can do locums kind of in surrounding states. I wouldn't have to go as far. And if my husband was with me, we could take him and his therapy dog and still go to those places. And then we thought, maybe we'll go a little farther away. So we're kind of searching how far we can go.
So I'm glad you brought up the IMLC. It sure does give you a lot of options. But before we dive into more locum stuff, tell me a little bit more about what it was like to be in private practice. You mentioned sometimes it was overwhelming, and I want to hear what that's like because I know that's different for every specialty. But describe a little bit more about some of the pressures that you had. Whether it's work and family or everything combined.
It was a lot of pressure. We, with 6 practitioners, we had about 20 people working for us in the office and a full scale OB-GYN practice. You have your ultrasonographer, non-stress test machines connected to the hospital 24/7. You've got to be there in 5 or 10 minutes, not 20 minutes, because depending on if a baby's in distress or something happens. So that was a lot of stress. And then some of the stress I was in because one of our employees was doing something that was illegal. So the police contacted me because I was the head of our practice, and I went to the police station and got to talk to the detective on the case. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is just overwhelming. This is so much stress, and I just don't want to have to deal with all of that. And then when I was remarried, we have 5 children together. And so our kids at that point were in high school and junior high. And there were so many activities for them, so many places I needed to be, and still on call every second or third night, 24/7, where I had to just drop everything when I was having a conversation with a child and run into work. And it just got to be a lot more stressful.
So, as a private practice owner, you've got a lot of things that you're dealing with other than just practicing medicine, right? You're dealing with employees and payroll and potentially there are issues that they bring into the practice, right?
Exactly, exactly so. And because we were a private practice, the hospital didn't support us at all. I guess if we would have been, owned by the hospital, maybe we would have gotten some locums or somebody to come help. But we did try to get locums and we had trouble finding anybody. So when I realized there was a larger market for that, and I could set more of my own schedule because I worked almost, every other holiday for 15 years and then every third holiday. And our holiday call is from home, but it's 24/7. So for that long weekend of Memorial Day that you're working, you come back and you think, oh, I'll get days off in lieu of that. And you don't. If you're working 40 hours a week, that means you're working 70 hours a week on call. And people I think that aren't physicians don't understand the time commitment and the call coverage.
Absolutely. I'm not a physician, but I work with enough physicians to know how demanding that can be. And I just feel like it takes a lot of courage to be able to make a shift because sometimes those are the expectations that are placed on you from a very early part of your career. So kudos for you for doing that. So you started looking into locum tenens, you started looking into IMLC, which is a beautiful program that was implemented in about 2018 that allowed you to be able to get a letter of qualification and get licenses in so many other states, thereby giving you a big footprint to work within the United States. I think it's up to about 40 states right now. But how did you start making contact with a locums agency, if that's what you did? But what were the next steps after you decided this might be an option for me to claim more of my time?
I started looking for locums agencies online, and I wanted to go or find an agency I thought would do a lot for me and would understand and have multiple jobs. So I found an agency and I clicked to apply for a job. And the person that called me back, which I'm very happy about, his name is Justin Mavis. He's with Weatherby, which I hear is a company that's very common. And he took a lot of time to get to know me, what I liked to do, where I wanted to go. And I would talk about certain jobs and he would say, now, wait a minute, I don't know if your husband would go to that job with you. And that was my plan, is to take my husband maybe somewhere warmer in the winter, not do as much time in the summer because he still does some maintenance for people that need help. So it really worked well, especially when he got to know me and know what I was looking for.
So when you first were in contact with Justin, did you know what a good recruiter or a good agency
No,
looked like and versus
I
a
had
bad
no
one?
idea. It was right. And now I'm looking on different podcasts and looking and learning what a good person would be. And there's somebody who, make sure you're set for the job, make sure they have all their T's crossed and I's dotted, and that you're good for that job, that you've done enough cases and things. And now I look back and think, he was asking me things like, how many hysterectomies have you done? About how many deliveries in the last 6 months have you done? And, asking those questions so that you would be able to get credentialed at that hospital. Just because they say, okay, we want you, you have the job, you still have to get credentialed.
What would you say if somebody was listening to this podcast and they're just going to get going on this journey and they haven't talked with any agencies or representatives yet? What kind of advice would you give to make sure that they're on the right path? Maybe some red flags to look out for as far as a recruiter or an agency, and then some of the things that you love about your recruiter. You've already mentioned a couple of those, but for somebody brand new, how would you, if you had to go back in time and do it all over again, maybe some advice to yourself or somebody further back on this journey of how do you find that good recruiter or agency?
Yeah, I think what was really helpful to me is that they had me put in all the paperwork that I needed for a job. So that means my driver's license and my social security card and all the information where I graduated from and my board certifications and, case logs from hospitals, all the things that those other places would look for, because if not, I would have 24 hours to get back to whatever hospital wanted to hire me with all that information. And it is a lot of information. I also think, making sure that you have tail coverage, especially for OBGYN, but for anybody to have tail coverage when you're done with that assignment or done with that work, that your tail doesn't fall off.
I like that you said that. It's about being proactive. And I certainly feel like being a physician is almost like being the president of the United States as far as like the amount of paperwork that can sometimes be involved. But do you have any tips or suggestions as far as how other physicians, I've got my own, but I'd love to hear your perspective. How do you keep organized? What are some tips that you use to keep on top of that? And I'm sure.
Organization. Oh my gosh, that is one thing I had to get better at. I mean, I thought I was pretty organized getting my master's degree, but I have files for things now.
Mhm.
So a file of all the paperwork I would need for for credentialings, my CME paperwork, when my licenses expire, when my DEA expires, at different times. And when I worked before, I would have an office manager that would keep track of those things and tell me when it was up. And it's up to me now. So I have to make sure I have all that paper all together. And then just to get an electronic file so that you can send that file somewhere to keep track of my CME. I was just looking up, I'm an osteopathic physician, so I was looking at the AOA site, and I went to a conference a month ago and it's still not posted. And I need to prove how much CME I've had for the last 3 years to apply in a different state. And so I'm scrounging trying to find all those CMEs today. So
Well, I love those tips. So you meet a good recruiter, you have a good experience. What's next? Like, tell me about your first locums tenens assignment. Where did you go? What was that like? How did it feel?
I went really close. So I work in a really big hospital with residents, and they had a smaller hospital that wasn't too far away. It was closer to where I lived. So I thought, well, that'll be great. I have mileage in a hotel. I'll take my husband with me. We'll hang out for this 3-day weekend and I'll see how it goes. So they signed me up for 8 weekends in 6 months. So I thought, okay, that's pretty good. I'll be all right. And I got there and I walked in and the lady there said, I have some bad news for you. She said, they came in today and the parent company was in the boardroom telling us that they are closing our unit in 6 weeks. So the entire unit was in an uproar. The secretaries, the nurses, where are we going to go? Where are we going to get a job? They're all in a panic. And so, fast forward, I got 3 of those 8 weekends and the other ones were canceled. And so these nurses, not just taking care of patients, but they're panicked for their own well-being and where can they go? So I think, what I did was talk to the nurses, talk to the secretaries and say, hey, I know you've said you don't want to go to the big hospital to work, but consider this or consider that. And they have a unit that they do no fetal monitoring. Sorry, no fetal monitoring. They just have external Dopplers and it's in natural birth center. That would be something that you'd like to do. So I spent a lot of time talking to them, calling the management at the other hospital and say, hey, these are good people. And they had jobs for them if they wanted it.
Wow, that is pretty impressive. You made an impact on your very first Locum Tenens assignment, but it sounds like there was some things that kind of came out of left field. It was a little bit unpredictable and probably not the outcome that you were looking for in your first assignment. Sometimes locums can be challenging like that. It can be unpredictable. And tell me more about how you deal with that, like those things that come up like that. Has that ever happened before, like another assignment being canceled? And how do you deal with that? Do you just brush it off and move on to the next thing, or does it get under your skin?
Yeah, I think you just have to brush it off and get used to it. I think the other thing is, as an OB-GYN, depending on where you work, not everything is the same. So from Northern Ohio to Southern Ohio, for me, is totally different. How personalities are, how patients are, what they expect. In a big city, many of our patients don't trust us at all. Many of them don't speak English. And so we're using lots of translators now. Of course, everybody's doing that. But even natural labor, what that means. And so offering people what they want in labor means I'm on my knees and the person is in the shower on a birthing ball. And the manager is speaking in my ear, please, you cannot let her deliver in the shower. You have to get her out of the bathroom and in the bed before she delivers. And I said, of course, absolutely. And so I could tell when she was getting ready to deliver. So we put her in the bed, and with the next contraction, we had a baby. But she wanted a natural delivery. So different things you can do to work with different people to give them what they want for their birth experience, because that's the big word now, the birth experience, the skin to skin, the golden hour, spending time with your family. I think, patients, because they know a lot more and they read a lot more, are more savvy on what they want in a labor and delivery experience.
Now, I'd love to hear like a juxtaposition of the busy times where you had all this overhead, you had employees, and you still juggling all these things, home life, family life, and doing what you want to do, and also self-care. And what locums is like for you now. Tell me a little bit more about how that contrasts. Like how does it feel? I want to hear both the good and the bad. I'm sure it's not all sunshine and roses, but sometimes there's frustrations that come with it. But tell me the good and the bad and how it's different from when you were stressed out and overwhelmed and had a private practice that you carried a lot of weight on.
Right. I'm in my home now. This is my home office, and my husband and I share a home office. He has a small little contracting business. And I'm listening to the birds, and I have my dogs here beside me. And I would have loved to take my dogs to work, but of course, you can't do that as a doctor. And so, now I'm here. I this weekend had a bridal shower for a daughter, and then another daughter I was helping spackle her drywall, and I was in my garden and I was running the rototiller and picking strawberries. And I thought, wow, any other weekend I would have been on call for my private practice and not be able to go anywhere and not be able to do those things where I could just relax and not think about where is my phone? Do I have my phone on me all the time?
That's so beautiful. Now the bad. What's tough about locums?
I think knowing you're going to be gone for 3 days. And when I get there, I'm still trying to figure out what to do. People talk about if you're going to go to a certain area to look up fun things to do and go the day before, which sounds good. But, I'm going to be drywalling the day before and helping my daughter with her house. So when I'm being a mom, which is great, but when I get there, I'm still trying to figure out what to do. I am looking for nearby restaurants so I can have some nice food and not just peanut butter and crackers in the doctor's lounge, because that's not good for me. Making sure I have my medication. So if I go somewhere for more than a month and medicines need to be shipped to me for for any of my medical issues, that I have access to that I've changed my address, et cetera. And then I don't want to just watch Netflix. So I'm trying to decide if I want to do some kind of an editing job for a medical journal, because just being in medicine and with the university, I published 5 or 6 papers in the last couple of years. So if that's something I would like to continue, that's something I can, of course, do when I'm doing locums.
So basically, you're saying that you're going to have some time off and some ramp up time when you get onto an assignment. So be a little bit more intentional. Think about what you're going to do if it's slow, right?
Yeah,
And how to use
absolutely.
that time up.
Absolutely. And I get there to this locum assignment, and it's usually really busy on Friday. So I could spend 6 to 10 hours at this locum assignment just covering call and covering midwives and what's happening. But on the weekend, I go in to make rounds. I might have to do a delivery. but it's not as busy. So I want to make sure that I'm doing wellness. I'm laughing because we didn't used to have wellness, of course. I'm older. And so our residents are always talking about wellness and what to do for that. So, for me, walking or bicycling is what I would do.
Yeah, let's dive into that. Unpack that a little bit because I know that you mentioned when we initially made contact that wellness was one of the decisions that motivated you to do locums. How do you define wellness? What does wellness mean to you? And how does that fit in with the bigger picture of physicians and physician burnout? Because that's something that I like to talk a lot about because I see it firsthand, people working 70, 80 hours per week and missing out on their life, but also like the stress that can come from that. Tell me about wellness and what that means to you.
Wellness for me is being able to cook or know where my food is coming from and cook that food versus just going out to eat or picking something up at the cafeteria. Because, the food that I grow, I have this strawberry patch in my back flower bed, and I picked all the strawberries for my daughter's shower this weekend. They were gone. The blueberries were there. The cherries were there. No, people ate all my strawberries because they are wonderful. They had, the best flavor, and they weren't very big, but it didn't matter. They were just so good. So knowing where produce comes from, for me, being able to exercise or walk and try to keep my weight under control, because as you get older, everybody struggles with that. But I think especially the 80-hour weeks. I mean, I used to do like a 36-hour shift where I would nap at night and get called by residents. And then I would do another shift, and then I would do another 24 on the weekend with the same resident crew that was just getting slammed. I think in, 24 hours, we would admit 10 to 12 people. And that was a usual day. So that's so stressful. The nurses were all stressed out at the hospital. And I think even cleaning, like, hospitals don't get cleaned like they did since COVID because they can't find people to work. They can't find people to work in the food service. So I think, we're all just struggling. And for me, not to be in charge of that, but be able to sit back, and take my dogs for a walk in the middle of my day instead of sitting at the computer the whole time.
How about mental health? Have you noticed any differences or changes? What are the long-term effects of people who are in that environment where they're stressed out and they're working constantly? Is there big repercussions that can come from that lifestyle for too long? And what have you noticed since you've downshifted?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And for me, last year was so difficult, with having three family members that weren't feeling well, trying to come up with how to help them all, trying to explain it to, my children who are all grown now. They're all 21 to 32, but they're not at home. So they don't see what, we're going through every day. And I found a great extended care facility for my mom. So after 5 months, she went there. She's very happy. She tells me the food is good and they take good care of her. And I call her or go see her every day, which is great. And our son is back to walking, running, and biking. So that's wonderful. And so that really has helped me. But mental health, just going through the stress of private practice and then going through the stress of all that call, it was just too much. And I was trying to figure out how to get out of it because you can't sign up for a 20 hours a week contract. If you sign up for 20, you're going to work 40, right? If you sign up for full time, then you still have call on top of it. So when people say 80 hours a week, well, there's no way you can do that. Exactly, but we're doing it. People expect us to do that. And I think, too, I'll say as a wife and a mother, you just can't do that. You cannot do it and be, mentally happy with what you're doing, all the things that children expect, spouses expect. It's just very difficult to stay on top.
Absolutely. I'm very passionate about that too, because I think a lot of people, they sign a contract based on the amount of money that they project to make in a year. And when you break it down for 40 hours, it's much different than if you're working 70 or 80 hours. All of a sudden, you're getting paid less money to have less time. So thanks for shedding some light on it. A question about your husband. You said you bring him on some locums assignments. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Tell me more about that.
Oh, he's so funny. He's a very hard worker. And so he doesn't like it that he has physicians and medications and things he has to take because he's not a physician. He used to fix airplane electronics in the Air Force. And so now he said he's happy to go to locum assignments with me, because then when people call him, he's not available to fix their plumbing and their drywall. And I think somebody called him about siding that blew off. We've had a lot of storms this week. So, it's something always. And so he rushes over and fixes the hot water heater. I mean, I can just tell you all these things that happen. Somebody needs their garden plowed and somebody needs a trench dug. And so if he's with me, guess what? He can't do it. He actually takes some days off because, after church on Sunday, he still would go somewhere and check out a project. And so because of his hard work ethic, now we will go shopping, maybe go out to eat, watch a movie together, go for a walk, and those kinds of things are working well for him.
That's beautiful. It almost protects his time and gives you more time with him. What's the most interesting assignment that you have? Like, what was the coolest location?
I haven't had lots of assignments, but the most interesting to me is working with midwives. So the midwives are doing deliveries and then they won't need me, right? Everything will be fine. Well, I'm laughing because, people that have had previous C-sections, you have to watch them really close. I still have to be by. If there's a laceration or a tear when someone delivers a baby, they don't always know how to sew it up and they'll call me. Sometimes a baby is almost ready to come, but we need forceps or a vacuum because fetal heart tones are down. And then there's C-sections. So one weekend I did 4 C-sections because they delivered 10 other babies. So it was very busy, but they still need me and, for GYN call, ectopics, that kind of thing.
Wow. Um, you're so good. Like when we hopped on this call, I felt like I warmed up to you so quickly. And I think a lot of people get anxiety about going on to a locum tenens assignment because it's like going to school for the first time. But what are some tips that you would share about like integrating into a new environment, like that first day that you're on locum's assignment? Do you have any practices or anything that you'd recommend to make sure that you fit in well with that new team that you've never even met before?
I think social clues are good. And I won't say I've been good at this all along. I'll say over time I've learned. So social clues, hey, where are you from? And do you have children? And oh, I had children. And so you're kind of sharing stories with those people. I'll meet patients like in the triage or emergency room that are OBs, and they'll have a certain thing on their shirt. And so I say, oh, do you like this team? So breaking down barriers that way. Or if they're from a different country or they have a similar name, oh, my sister has that name. I'll remember your name because my sister has that name. So those kinds of just personal relationship things to get to know the nurses so that they'll trust you. I keep saying to nurses, which is kind of funny. People think this is kind of crazy, but I'll say, okay, I want to do this and this and this, and this is my order. Is that okay with you? Does that sound reasonable? Or do you have any other ideas? And the reason is because you're new. You think this is what you're going to do, but at that hospital, it's not. It's something different, although it's not dangerous to a patient. It's just different. And so I've had a nurse complain to the chief of OB because I wanted to order a certain medicine and she wasn't familiar with it. And the nurse didn't know me, so she didn't think that she could question my order to me, which of course she could. She could say, why are you not wanting to order that? And I'd say, oh, I didn't know that's what you do here. So I think as you work in different areas, maybe different states, to see what they do, to say, this is what I would usually do. Does that sound, reasonable with what the rest of you do here?
I love that you said that. The first thing is it's self-awareness, right? You're aware you're in a new environment. And then 2 is making those connections. And one thing that you brought up that I love to teach when it comes to like marketing and sales is to find a connection point. And most people probably don't know what that means, but you described that very well. Find something that you have in common and ask some questions about that. I like to be a detective. So those are beautiful tips. My last question for you would be, what is there any special message or advice that you would love to share with somebody who is just getting started on this journey? Like what would you say to that person? Because I know that there's probably somebody out there who typed in Locum Tenens podcast and then next thing you know, they're listening to you. But what message would you share with them?
I think I was ready for something different. So, with the stress of life, with the emotional stress, I've been doing this for 30 years now. So 30 years of experience. I thought there's got to be something else to do. And I worked in a rural area for a long time and we couldn't find people to come cover us. We were stuck. And so if that's something I can do to go help someone else And to me, that's interesting, exciting, something new, something different, but it's really the same. So when you're scared to step out and you think, I'm just going to give this a try, I think you'll be surprised how well you'll do. The only thing I was unsure about is how to get all my paperwork together. One of the hospitals wanted my childhood immunization record. So I had to go find that. It was amazing to me. Of course they want COVID and flu, but all the paperwork and all the things I had to hunt up. So mostly I had everything, and that worked well.
That's such beautiful advice. Thank you so much, Dr. KS. I love that. It is a cool name. Thank you for taking this time and sharing your wisdom with this audience. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. I will catch you on the next episode. But before I leave, make sure that you share this episode with somebody who can relate with this message. I would love it if you get the word out. And the last thing I'd say too is it takes courage to advocate for yourself. But if you feel like you're being overworked, if you feel like you deserve more, you definitely do. So lead with courage and go after it.